If you'd lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ask everybody to remain standing for a moment of silence. Brian Carey, our conservation director, lost his father this past week, and I'd like you to keep him and his family in your thoughts. All right, thank you. Now this is a special meeting of the Board of Selectmen. It's special because it's not being held next Wednesday, which would be normally our first Wednesday meeting in February. Because that date did not work for this board, we moved it up to the 31st. So technically this is our third meeting in January, but it's a special meeting, and what that dictates is that the items on the agenda are the items we will discuss. We cannot add any items to the agenda. For the most part, I don't believe that's going to be an issue, but there are certain rules along those lines that make special meetings different than regular meetings. With that as a start, first up to item 3 is to hear, consider, and act upon the following appointments. A, Flood and Erosion Control Board, Mary Susan Hunt, a Democrat from 24 Fairfield Beach Road, for a term of 11/16 to 11/21, and this is to fill a vacancy for Frank Patisse, who resigned. I have a motion to accept.
I'll make a motion.
A second.
Second.
All right, any comments from my colleagues?
No, thank you for your willingness to serve the town.
Yep, thank you, Mary, for volunteering to serve on this commission.
Yes, Ms. Hunt, we had a great conversation on the phone. Where are you? There you are. And I want to thank you for stepping up, and I look forward to your service on the board. Any further comments from the board? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Congratulations and thank you for your service. You do need to get sworn in, and your chairman is right in front of you, and you can talk to him about meetings that may be coming up. Next up, for the Parks and Recreation Commission, to hear, consider, and act upon the appointment of Brian J. Nareau, Republican, 105 Mountain Laurel Road, for a term of 11/15 to 11/20, and this is to fill a vacancy for Doreen Heron, who resigned. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
A second.
Second.
All right, any comments from my colleagues?
Just thank you to Mr. Nero for coming back and volunteering for the board.
Yep.
Welcome back to the rec board.
Yep. I'm thrilled. Brian did a great job as chair during his past term, and I'm thrilled that he would consider rejoining at this point, because I think we have some very important decisions and projects on the board coming up. Any further comments? No? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Brian, thank you and congratulations. Next up, because we have a few parents in the audience, and I know they're waiting for an item later on the agenda, if I could have a motion to take item 8 for the Board of Education out of order and take it next.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the item before us is now to hear and consider capital project requests for Mill Hill Elementary School and Sherman Elementary School. If there's somebody who wants to address that. Okay. Hi, Tom. And I don't, let's, before you get too started, let's talk about a few things here, because I think as we reviewed the material, I think there's some questions that have come up for our board. I want to get to...
Just like I brought hard copy
Oh.
of the cover if you want.
Sure,
All right,
that's
thank
great.
you.
It's easier to fish through. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
And just in looking at the backup material for this, there were a few things that didn't seem to be here. And, Mike, okay if what I'm thinking that makes sense to have a few of these conversations up front before they get too far into this, and then decide how far we want to get into this.
Sure.
Right. The one, I guess, in looking at this, Tom, we didn't seem to see an ed spec for either project, either Mill Hill or Sherman. in our packet. And that's something traditionally we look for before we set up a committee, as we did with kind of Holland Hill and Riverfield. Yes, go ahead.
If I may. Philip Dwyer, Chairman of the Board of Education. These two projects have been on the planning board for a long time. Sherman School, and they're really two different issues with different impacts. Sherman School, this is the third phase of a three-phase program that the town said, okay, once we start, because of FEMA regulations, we have a commitment, if you will, soft commitment, to finish phase 2, and then at the appropriate time do phase 3. And so the ed specs for this phase, while some of the details will change, they follow a pretty similar format. And in the past, this project has been assigned, I think, to the Standing Building Projects Committee, whose charge is already there. And so the ed specs are being worked on. In fact, the drafts for both Sherman and Mill Hill are on the superintendent's desk today, I just was told. And based on that staff work being completed, when the board voted to move this along at their January meeting, it was with the full intent of immediately dealing with the ed specs, with the hope that because it does take time for the Board of Selectmen to say, yes, we're in favor of this project, now let's recruit building committee members, work through the Board of Finance, work through the RTM, so that we can ensure that we get on the bond calendar and pass all of the required resolutions at the RTM level by the June date, that we were hopeful that the Board of Selectmen would move the project along, knowing that the ed specs, generally ed specs are about 90%, they follow a familiar format, and they only vary a little bit. So for Sherman, there's not going to be too much variation. The only open, if I move on to Mill Hill, if you will, the only real open question on Mill Hill, it's an addition and renovation project, very much similar to Holland Hill. The renovations have been known for a long time in terms of the program deficiencies and the mechanical, electrical, plumbing deficiencies. And so those won't change in the ed spec, we kind of know that. The open question is whether it should be a 504 school, which is the size school that the Board of Ed has been aiming at for the last 7 or 8 years, or should it be a smaller size school that if you just looked at a 10-year projection, you could talk yourself into saying, well, maybe we can do 462. We don't need to do 504. Maybe we can do 2 or 3 less classrooms. But because we build these buildings for a 30 to 40-year life cycle, the debate that we have at the Board of Ed, the prior Board of Ed, the current Board of Ed that has 5 new members have never talked about this, is to allow for flexibility as we face 30 or 40 years worth of enrollment changes and demographic changes. Perhaps the cost of those extra 2 or 3 classrooms up front will be money well invested. And so the debate that we'll have at the February 13th meeting and maybe the next meeting is to, should the ed spec say 504, should it say 462? But the fundamental ed specs are going to match the renovation program that is needed. And we do need to have program deficiencies with OT and PT rooms and whatnot, so those won't change. So it's really just the one debatable item with a new board. So we were hoping that we could, the board was hoping that we could work in concurrence with the schedule of the town to get through to the June and the schedule of a new board dealing with ed specs for the first time. So we advanced it to you with that hope in mind. So yes, they're not there, but they will be there before the probably the Board of Finance or the RTM has to act on this.
Wow, couple thoughts. One, these projects are both very important. They're both very needed, and there is no question that we need them. As you said, they're on a long-range plan. Our question as a board is, how come we didn't get this 6 months ago? You just talked about what you were thinking. You presented it to this board today. If you've been thinking about that for a month, we expect to hear about that a month ago, so we have time to consider that. You're telling us that there is no ed spec, The ed spec for Sherman was presented when to the Board of Selectmen?
I thought I just went through that process.
You did. I'm asking, what year was the ed spec presented to the Board of Selectmen for
No,
Sherman?
actually, the first phase of Sherman was the annex building in 2009, 2010. There was an ed spec for that phase. The second phase was the first renovation and addition, and the building committee at that time rejected going to the state for reimbursement. So there was no ed spec for the second phase.
So what Mr. Dwyer just said about
So
there
the
being an
third
ed spec
phase-
that was already considered has not been presented to this board, but also point out that the second phase started in what year?
12, 13.
How many folks on this board served in 12-13? I think I was here. So this board has not seen that ed spec. Is that ed spec in this packet?
No,
Okay, so you didn't include the ed spec in the packet.
no, but Sal Morbido and I met to talk about the fact that we thought it would be prudent to try and support the town of Fairfield by filing for reimbursement on Phase 3, even though the building committee at the time rejected Phase 2. So we have been working on an ed spec to bring to the Board of Ed.
Okay, and again, why isn't that here in the packet?
Well, I personally don't believe the ed spec needs to be included with the entire packet for funding approval. We're looking to move the project forward because we're getting new information from the State Department of Education, Office of School Construction Grants, that there's going to be changes going up there to show them drawings and specifications. Changes that are going to take more time, more detail, more enrollment information, and we're worried we're going to miss the deadline of June 30th.
And the
So
fact that
we'd
you...
like them to
yeah.
work concurrently.
And I'm sorry, but the fact that you personally don't think that's important is a question that this board should be asked, not decided by you by not bringing the material forward and asking if that's what we need. And second, it's been in the long-range plan. This couldn't have been brought forward any time in the last 6 months to this board. All right, we haven't rejected that, we haven't, it's sitting here talking about you're not sure how big the school's going to be, 504 or
Mr.
not.
Tetro.
Yes.
We presented our rationale for
Yes.
why we wanted to work concurrently. Certainly, if the Board of Selectmen has a different rationale that they'd like to follow, we've presented it respectfully, consider it respectfully, and if you say, no, we want to set a standard that we'll not consider anything unless we have an ed spec, just tell us that, and we'll
Yep.
follow that.
Forgive me, Mr. Dwyer, but that's the standard we followed for the last 7 years. All right, and yes, I am frustrated. We had a big blow-up on ed specs, and you were part of that at the Board of Finance meeting. In terms of developing this ed spec, have we gone to the Board of Finance and asked them what they expect to see in this ed spec?
We've not done that process in the past.
Okay, so we spent 2 hours at a meeting that threatened the Holland Hill project, and we didn't go back to them when we're doing a new ed spec and ask them what they need to see to make sure it goes smoothly through at each step?
There's a lot of factors that went into that debate, none of which had anything to do with the ed spec.
Again, without asking the Board of Finance that question, I think you're risking their concern and their issue over this. So
We haven't normally asked the Board of Finance for opinions on how to write the Board of Ed specs. That
No,
has not been normally part of the process.
no, but since it was such a big discussion just a few months ago, since it did raise serious questions about the Holland Hill project and how that worked, would think it would be a reasonable precaution if we, I'm looking at this being on a tight time frame, so I'm looking at tight proposals coming through on this. So yeah, I mean, from my office, we got the packet in the mail. We had to actually follow up by email back to Mr. Cullen to say, what do you want? Are you asking for dollars to be voted? Is there a resolution? What's taking place? All right, and is there going to be an ed spec? And frankly, I'd look for a timeline in terms of when construction's going to start. What are the approval steps? What's taking place? Mr. Dwyer, to your point, that if we're trying to get this through, I'd like to know what those steps are to make sure that we do meet that schedule, that it's even possible to meet that schedule, because one of my concerns is it's too late now. Because I don't have anything here in front of me that shows we can meet that schedule.
If it's acted on in January, February, then that normally allows enough time to get through all the bodies until we get to the RTM in June. So, I mean, we're on a time frame right now that would meet the June deadline. Mr. Cullen might be able to talk to you about what the timeline typically is once the RTM acts, and how long does it take to put a building committee together, do documents, present it to the state,
Okay, so-
and get to actual construction.
But at this point, we have nothing in writing in front of us that shows what the timeline is and what we're expected to act by. All right, because there's nothing here that does that. So yeah, and with respect to Sherman, that's also in the flood zone, as I understand it. Have we spoken to our FEMA officer?
Yes,
And-
Mr. Cohen has.
Okay. Do we have anything back from him defining what the targets are?
Yes, I can go through that when you want.
Well, it'd be nice if it was in the packet, yeah.
Okay.
Do you have something in writing from him?
Just an email confirmation of what we need to do is verify the current cost of the Sherman Elementary School building, which has changed over the years, so.
So we haven't verified that
I
yet.
have, I have all that.
I'm sorry, do you have that or not?
I do.
You just said you have to verify it. Sorry, guys, I don't mean to...
No, it's okay.
I got a couple questions too.
Okay.
Sorry.
For the record, Executive Director of Operations, Tom Cullen. The value of the Sherman Elementary School building as of November 29, 2017 is $5,476,200.
Okay.
What was that again?
$5,476,200.
Okay.
For FEMA regulation, we need to be 50% of the construction cost, which would be $2,738,100. Our Phase 3 project request is $3,200,000. Of that, we believe that the FEMA regulated amount will be $2,560,000 or less. So we meet the requirements of the FEMA regulation.
Okay.
The reason for that is FEMA doesn't regulate the cost for architects, engineers, maintenance type issues like locker replacement, items like that. And I went over
Yeah.
that with Jim Wendt.
And I realize there's certain costs that are included in that and certain ones that aren't. We monitor that very closely, and we did on the last Sherman. Is there some reason you didn't include that breakout analysis in our packet so we could see that?
No, I did my due diligence by calling Jim, working it through, making sure we were going to meet it. He thought it looked real good. Several conversations back and forth so that I knew we were going right direction. But I didn't think to include that with the packet.
Just on that, is there a normal process that Mr. Wendt's office follows with FEMA to go back and forth documentation, information to validate this information?
Not really, it's really just a form. He has a document that they follow, FEMA document, that spells out renovations and additions, what's included, what's not. And he sent me just the section on it. So I can certainly share that with you, a lot of my notes in the email he sent me.
So, just following up on that, so the process is he just submits it and they take his word for it? Or do they do some type of validation and come out and, how do they close the loop on approving it?
I think they get the drawings and specifications from the building committee for the project, and then they deem what's maintenance, what's not, and what's, from the cost estimate from the construction manager.
Okay.
So, but I don't know how he closes the loop with them or anything.
Okay. Thank you.
A couple things. One, on the Sherman School, the soft cost miscellaneous items, are those the 355? Is that what you're saying is not FEMA? They
Yeah, I have-
include that in there?
That, I have the lockers at 100,000. I believe the ADA and the life safety stuff will be maintenance items. I also believe that it's possible the air conditioning will not be FEMA regulated, because there's already in mechanical means of fresh air, so the ductwork and the equipment is there. We're just adding the AC to it, and that could be a very large number that would be reduced.
That's hence my question. I'm just trying to understand what the process is for, what gets submitted, what gets approved, and what happens before it gets...
The whole package will get
stamped.
submitted
Yeah.
with the cost
And
estimate.
I had another question. On the Mill Hill School, what year was this on, like, the construction chart?
18, 19.
Oh, I remember it being 1920.
From the
No,
September...
18, 19 for the approval, but I think you're asking about the construction.
Well, because we were given a sheet of when these projects would come up, So I'm going off of that sheet, so I thought this would be coming at least a year later. So when I got this in the packet, I was surprised to see that it was.
No, the financial summit we had in September with the town, it was 18-19 of the
But again,
waterfall.
to differentiate, 18-19 is the year that we would seek approval for it, and then the creating the building committee, designing it, and construction would be a later year. You may be thinking of the actual drawdown of cash, which is the construction period, which is later than 18-19.
So I think when you're doing that list, you should put the year you're starting the project, which would be 18-19, not a year after that year.
There are two blocks on it. The first block shows the approval year. The second block shows the cash draws for future periods. So actually, that information
That's the way the
is on
town
that-
asked for it.
is
They
on
want the
that chart.
cash draw by year.
It's a complicated chart.
And then the other thing I noticed on the agenda was a resolution. Is that for a grant? Is that the way we're referring to the school reimbursement loan?
Yes.
Do we approve all school reimbursements here at the board? Or are you guys applying for stuff on your own?
There might be, no, I don't think there is. I was thinking the security stuff we just submitted, but it's all either non-recurring. Like, a lot of the non-recurring requests where we need a building committee, we don't have an ed spec that we submit at the same time. So all the roofs we do, security, portable classrooms, those didn't have an ed spec going along with the request.
So I was
For the
sort of under the
project.
assumption, like any project we do, you're submitting the paperwork on your own if it's eligible for reimbursement.
Yes.
Right? And do you ask special permission each time for us to seek reimbursement on that?
We don't need special request unless special legislation unless we miss a deadline like June 30th.
But if it's bonded and we are expecting a reimbursement, the answer is yes. It comes through the town bodies. Is that correct, or did you want to? Yeah.
That's a correct statement. Every time
And
that
name
they're...
and title.
Name and title, sorry. Sal Morbito, Manager of Construction, Security, and Safety. The 3 resolutions that are in your packet are standard for each reimbursable project that we have. So it comes through for a roof, it comes through for an addition alteration.
So it was written as a grant, that's why I was confused on it.
Well, it's called the Office of School Construction Grants.
They've changed their names over the years. It's now the Office of School Construction Grant and Review. It used to be Bureau of School Facilities or Office of School Facilities.
And they're pretty picky how they want it worded when it comes up to them.
Mr. Tetra?
Go ahead.
Mr. Morbido, as long as you're here.
Yes, sir.
Can you quickly give us kind of a construction timeline? Because that's one of the things that is definitely missing for both of these projects.
If you want it.
For which project?
For either one, a quick walkthrough for both, just on, in best case scenario, worst case scenario, the timeline for the approval process and the timeline for construction, commencing and project
I
being
didn't bring it.
complete.
Okay.
Just ballpark if that's all you have, because
I had a timeline laid out for Holland Hill we've been looking at, but I didn't bring it, sorry,
Right.
that we could have followed.
Right. To use Holland Hill as a comparison for Mill Hill, it was
Okay.
approximately 2 years ago that it was less than 2 years ago that you established the building committee. It was actually March of 2016. And the revision on the ed spec that you were talking about was January of 17. So in that time period, they've gone from inception, electing the chairman of the building committee and setting up their work to, we're actually, 2 days ago, put Holland Hill out to bid. So that gives you a time frame of approximately 21, 22 months from when you've established a building committee to when you're actually bidding for a project of that size. Mill Hill might be smaller in scale,
right, but it's,
so you might save a little bit of time because there's a little bit less investigation for the project team. What's different now, and we got caught with it with the change on the Holland Hill project for the state, not only did they change their acronyms, they're actually changing what they're doing on the reimbursement process. Where we used to go in for 2 meetings on on a project, we used to go in for what was called a prep meeting early on in the project. Basically, that was, here's our rules, this is how you're going to make your specifications and drawings be presentable to our offices. They no longer do that. Second important meeting that we had was called a PCT, a Plan Completion Test meeting, which was an analysis to see if our plans and specifications were sufficiently developed so that they can accept them for review. Those have all been replaced with more detailed, I don't want to say detailed meetings, but new meetings starting at conceptual design. So they actually want to meet with the architect early on conceptual design, actually challenge design criteria to make sure that the state's not participating monetarily in a project that's overly large. So, you know, they don't.
Based on a standard for Connecticut. So of the 166 districts, they're going to look at an elementary school across the district and then look at ours and say, is it falling into the same line as what would be standard?
And then and the next step is a design development, which is about a 50% point.
Right.
And then the last one is after construction review. Actually, the building official signs off on it, so it's a little bit easier to turn it in at the end. But it's expanded.
More steps.
And we need design professionals involved with those earlier on than we did before on any of the other projects.
So I get all that. So just quickly walk me through what you think the process should be from now up until that point. You know, you have Board of Selectmen, well, you have to go back to the Board of Ed. I mean, there's ed spec work that needs to be done, right?
Right.
And there's decisions that need to be made that flow into what we vote on or what we look at.
Right.
But on a normal process, how would you see that happening? When would you see something being submitted and being started and then being finished?
Well, right now, we're expecting that the ed specs would be at the next Board of Ed meeting in February. Whether they act on it, if it's a first read or discussion period, and then it flows to the next meeting, that's waits to be seen. But we'll say within two meetings, Board of Ed should be able to resolve the ed specs. The three resolutions in your packet don't actually push the financing. It says that a building committee will be established. And that's the actual resolution that the state's looking for, is that a building committee is established. They don't actually worry or ever ask were bodies put on that building committee. They just have the little piece of paper and say, yep, they told us in the proper format that they've established a building committee. That's required. That piece of paper is required, along with the ed spec, to file what's called the SCG 049. It used to be called the EDO 49. And that establishes the project.
Kicks off the project.
And we want to get that in before June 30th, or you're actually adding 1 year to the approval cycle on the state level for which you can receive reimbursement. From that June date, it flows into October, where the state determines what category it's in. Then it flows to the legislature in December, and then somewhere around February, March, or April, the legislature funds the bond. So if you miss that June date, you pushed all that 1 year back, because you have to wait for the bond before you can actually ask for your money back.
That's the answer I'm looking for. So we're looking at June 30th, working backwards.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm more than a little frustrated, just because I've spent a lot of today listening to calls and emails from parents, from RTM reps, that are very concerned about these projects. And I feel the sense of urgency in their voice and in their concerns. I'm just not seeing the same sense of urgency in terms of the preparation, in terms of getting us here. It seems that we're missing the ed specs, and we're not sure when they're going to be available. This was presented really without any student projections, and in dealing with the size of the school, and generally look at the student projections as part of that. There's not a timeline with all key dates to show us when these things need to happen. And again, the FEMA documentation you have, but didn't seem to be presented in here.
We can certainly get you those. The timeline we're working on, the ed specs we have in front of the superintendent, and the FEMA stuff I have all written down, and information from Jim Webb.
Is there some reason that we waited until now to present this? Given we're trying to get it all done by June 30th, there's a lot of key dates. Is there some reason we waited to this point in the year? Why didn't we present this last fall, sometime sooner?
I think we just rolled it into the typical capital project requests that we do along with the non-recurring. Just like we did Holland Hill and the Fairfield Woods Middle School roof last year. Those were both capital requests.
Right, the Fairfield, yeah, this is like the busiest time of the year from a budget standpoint and non-recurring standpoint going on. So it just...
Well, we were originally asked by your office, financial office, to get everything in by January 5th. I did that before the Christmas holiday,
That's for non-recurring, certainly.
and I did the capital request at the same time. There were a
Understand.
few questions around that, and we were hoping for the first meeting in January with the Board of Selectmen, but that got canceled.
The,
So it's kind of pushed it to January 31st, which is a little late, I agree with you.
just the challenge is, I'm looking at, you're asking this board to make decisions without all the information that we would deem relevant here. And given the blow-up on the ed specs, yes, I would suggest strongly that you review the ed specs with the Board of Finance so they understand what's in there and they're clear on that. Because as much as the ed specs don't go to them directly for approval, they do to go to them for support for the dollar approval and the resolutions that go through.
Understand. So we laid out, we took the Holland Hill ed specs and changed the name to Mill Hill, and then we made our changes for the Mill Hill School and highlighted them, so it'll be clear to see the difference between the two. And we're ready to share those with the Board of Ed, and we can do the same with the Board of Finance.
Okay, and this board too, hopefully, but yes, so it, because I think we had some of the same concerns.
Yeah, that way you'll get to see the differences.
Not to belabor point, I'm going to suggest that we take no action on this today, so that Mr. Cullen can come back at any time this information is complete. Encourage him to come back as soon as possible, so that we can meet, and if need be, hold a special meeting. I think that was suggested in one of our conversations this afternoon.
It was.
That, so we don't hold this up at all. But I think this is, and then, Mr. Dwyer, I'm going to suggest that maybe you and I and the superintendent sit down and go through the steps on this and what documentation we want with each piece of this. I was laboring under the assumption that we were kind of all clear on this. It's obviously not the case, so I think maybe if we document this, we won't have this situation recur.
And it will be, for that meeting, it will be very helpful to the Board of Ed if that protocol is now going to include, we get permission from the Board of Finance before we approach the Board of Selectmen. The Holland Hill was a special circumstance. And whether you want to create that as a standing protocol because of that, or whether that's just unique to, so that should be part of the conversation, so we know whether that protocol includes that as a first stop rather than Board of Selectmen.
No, let me be clear. I am not suggesting that. I'm
Okay,
suggesting,
good.
because that became an issue last spring,
Yes, yes.
and it was a topic.
Yeah.
You were part of that conversation, all right? That it would make good business sense to run what you're going to do by them, because they're going to ask to see that ed spec when you're asking them to approve the project. It is not a requirement, and it's not a step that I put in every other project, but I would put it in since there seem to be so many significant questions that cause them concern. Would think that would be appropriate. In fact, let me rephrase that. I would think it would have been appropriate to do that sometime in the last 9 months, rather than waiting until now.
So that's unique to this project. We understand that.
It's
Thank
unique,
you.
yes.
Thank you.
So just a
So
couple,
anything? Go ahead.
yeah, I just have a couple things. You know, these are both very important projects for our schools, our students, and the communities, right? And I support both projects, you know, and we're going to get them done. That said, I have to say, you know, we aren't prepared to do that at this moment because of, you know, the missing information and in my case, not understanding some of the information because I'm just hearing it here for the first time. So I would, I'm certainly okay not taking any action tonight, but I don't want to have that lack of action slow down what we're trying to get done here, right? So Mr. Dwyer mentioned the word concurrent. How can we work together? So what can we do as a board? You know, Mr. Tetro and you just went back and forth on looking at the process. How can we help you? What can we do? When can we meet? Can we get together? Is there anything we can do to help these two communities get these two projects in proper order so that they can be presented and we can move through the legislative process and still meet the June 30 deadline, you know, without jumping over steps or voting on things without complete information? Happy to do that. I just want to know how we can help.
A couple of comments. Sherman School, you may want to think of that as different than the Mill Hill project, which is
Sure.
much bigger. If we were to put a set of ed specs together and the building committee looked at them and once again said it's not, I don't know what the rationale is that they had, but it doesn't make sense for us to do ed specs and go through the state process, so we're not going to use them. It may be that the question of ed specs for Sherman School will be moot. So you may want to move Sherman School ahead because it falls into a different kind of category relative to ed specs, and certainly once you get the memo that says, here's Jim Wentz calculations, that might be all that you need in order to move that project forward. Mill Hill, clearly the ed specs will be more important to you, and hopefully our board will act on them in February, and we can get back on your agenda. It may be that if we need to test it out with the Board of Finance first, we may end up on your agenda in March, but that still would be enough time if you approved it, show up on Board of Finance in March, and then in May for RTM. The timing works, as I said before, that as long as we get going in January, February, it works for June, for the June 30 deadline. There's heightened interest on the part of everybody because the state certainly is changing. So the sooner we get in front of them, I think the better off the town is.
I would think as soon as, you know, whenever it's requested of us on the Sherman project, knowing whether the Board of Ed has a rationale for going for the reimbursement or not, I think would be an important item to discuss. So we're aware of that, because we've got to look at what the net costs are
Yeah.
as we go through this.
I'll ask Tom to be prepared to explain to the Board of Ed what caused the building committee, and I assume that this will be assigned to the Special Project Building Committee as the other two phases have been, because that will change, of course, as well, but,
Yeah, that
so
would
what
be,
the rationale was, Tom can bring the Board of Ed up to date as to what their rationale was.
that would be a discussion we should have, but at this point, since we haven't talked about that at all yet, it hasn't been discussed with the Special Projects Group in
Yep.
terms of their availability or willingness to take it on. They have
Correct.
been.
So that'll be a topic that Tom can bring us up to date on as to the pluses and minuses of going that direction.
I would close on this. I agree that the Sherman School is a different situation than Mill Hill School. I'm definitely not comfortable voting on the Mill Hill School tonight, not knowing whether it's a 504 or a 460. That's a big deal to have that information out for the public to absorb, hear, and follow through on. So
Well, and to that point, just because one of the things we learned last spring is that a 504 doesn't handle 504 students. It handles about 10 or 20% less than that in terms of what our capacity is. So a 460 would handle significantly less than that. And I think that gets back into what's the plan, given school population projections, which it would also be good to share with us, so we understand what's taken place with these schools and how that might impact any other considerations down the road. So we, again, so we can make an informed decision about what we're saying yes to and what we're supporting.
Mr. Tetro is correct. Good planning for school construction is that you plan for 85 to 90% occupancy because you can't guarantee that there's going to be exactly the number of fourth graders in any given year in that neighborhood. And so if you continue to use that, then that's what results in we could get by on a 10-year projection at 462. But if you say we're building this for a longer term, then you debate whether we should still build to 504. And that's where the range of debate
Sure.
is. And so that's, the range is known. Where the Board of Ed will fall on that will be known once they meet and challenge and talk to themselves about it.
Yeah, I think one of the steps in there is that when we have the ed specs, it will be back to this board to come up with a charge.
Right.
That's not the most difficult thing to do. That doesn't take a lot of time, but it is one of the steps. But we traditionally have had the ed specs in order to be able to appropriately do the charge.
Yeah, and I think we should have the ed specs. I completely agree with that. So-
And so, sorry to belabor this, but to answer specifically Mr. Kiley's question, if you think you can move this ahead for Sherman without the ed specs, because one time they were included, one time they were not because of the building committee, and that the central piece of information you need is the calculations from Mr. Wendt, if he can when he gets those to you, if you could put that on your next agenda and move Sherman ahead, because I'm sure that those would be ready by your next agenda versus Mill Hill, which may take a little bit longer.
Okay, then, has the Board of Ed already decided we're not going to go for reimbursement on that, so we won't use an ed spec?
We had assumed that we would create an ed spec, but it was the building committee that actually made that decision, not the Board of Ed, back in Phase 2.
Okay, and I just can't remember that far back as to what that was, but, so either way, the Board of Ed then would have an ed spec for that.
Our plan is to approve one on February 13th,
Right.
but if the building committee then decides it isn't worth the town's while to actually use that and go to the state for reimbursement and whatnot, that'll be the building committee.
Yeah, the only time I remember that being done was on the ward roof, actually. I don't,
Yeah, I think the building committee, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think when they looked at Phase 2 at Sherman, they were concerned that the state may request things from the design team and the building committee that would add cost to the project.
and that would
That was part
choose
of the
us to
deciding
exceed the
factor.
FEMA limit
Could have, yeah.
at that point.
Correct,
So when they
So they
looked
were
at
worried
that, they
about
said
that.
it didn't make sense from that standpoint.
correct.
All right, so again, that's why that FEMA limit's so important, that's why we certainly want to know what that is. So it was from that standpoint, from the ward roof committee, is that, and actually it would have cost us more money to meet some of the state specs to get the reimbursement
Correct, with the
than we'd get
pitch.
back in the reimbursement, so
Right,
it
with the
didn't make
pitch
any
of the
sense.
insulation and everything, correct.
But then I think with the help of the state delegation, we got the reimbursement anyway.
Correct, correct.
Okay. All right, are you clear on what we're looking for, what this?
Crystal.
We can certainly talk after this, so I don't mean to say this is the only discussion we'll have. I think we should have some more on that to make sure that this board has the information it needs to move on a timely basis. And I think the commitment here is that we understand these are very important projects and very needed, and we'll move as quickly as you allow us to.
Thank you.
Any further comments from here?
No.
And items 9 and 10 are the three motions. We don't have to pass those. There's no urgency in passing those as long as they're done by June. Is that correct, Mr. Morabito? So we don't have to take those up tonight? So we'll take those up.
Tonight,
We'll take those up whenever we take up the project itself, so they move kind of through the system get to the RTM at the same time? All right, thank you. That might help, rather than trying to explain to the RTM why they have these three resolutions and no project. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, the next up would be the Fairfield Ludlow High School Building Committee to hear an update from the Fairfield Ludlow High School Building Committee on the window replacement project. Mr. Donald, thank you.
Nice to see you.
Okay, my name's Mark Donald. I am the chairman of the Fairfield Ludlow High School Building Committee, also known as the Eternal Building Project. So basically what I just handed is a high-level cost summary of where we stand in regards to the project. And just as a quick refresher, we identified, based on timing of construction, approval on the EPA, et cetera, we broke the project up into 3 phases. Of which the most complex was the PCB remediation and the window replacement, which were together in terms of project. Phase 1 was the roof, completed 2 summers ago. Phase 2 was the additions of 4 classrooms, 2 science labs, and an expansion of the cafeteria. That is also complete. And so we are currently in the second summer of replacing the windows. Right now, we're about 65% done, complete, so we have about 35% left, including some of the largest windows, which may take a little more time. However, we're confident that the project will be completed in time for the 18-19 school year. So just drawing your attention to some of the items on the cost summary. Again, this is just a high-level summary. So just noting the construction costs were identified as $3,290,180. You'll notice that second box down is the allowances built into that by Gilbane, our construction manager. And as you see, there's some money that's left open for allowances in case the need arises. And then you'll notice the next box down, and I think this is one thing that we need to keep in mind. As I reported, don't recall when, at a prior meeting, there were some PCBs noted in the paint that were at current levels, which may or may not require removal. So we put a plan to the EPA at the end of last calendar year where we're continuing to test. They asked us to do more testing, which would go into this last box where you see the environmental consultant. We had already budgeted money that has not been expended in that. So you'll see that's $30,000. So this particular box that we allowed in terms of owner allowance and contingency falls under the owner's consultant fees. So that's part of the $204,985. So those are kind of 2 just clarifications, this high-level cost summary. And then, as you can see, the contingency we haven't touched to date. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to, I would like to say, return a significant amount of money to the town, but I think it's better said that we will hopefully not spend a significant amount of money in the town.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Thank you, Mark, for that update.
No, I'm good. All right, just the $30,000 for PCB testing. Tell us a little bit about what is being tested for and why that's taking place now.
Okay. I will do my best to explain it from the technical perspective, and if Sal Morbido or Eric Cushman from Gilbane need to jump in, they can. But currently, because of the temperature concerns, HVAC changes, et cetera, in regards to the building, we have to do more air and wipe tests. So right now, I believe within the next month, they want to do a pending approval by the committee of payment of the $30,000 for Woodard and Curran, our environmental consultant. They would do an air and wipe test to determine that there's no PCBs, no danger to anybody who's inside the building. As previously reported, there currently is none based on all the extensive testing that's been done. So they want to do another round in the next month or so, and then I believe the other round is in June. I believe, does that sound right, Sal? Just to ensure that the PCBs are in paint. There's nothing there to date. There have been, again, extensive testing, making sure that it's safe to be in the building. And we're hopeful that as a result of this testing, that the EPA will allow us to keep the paint, keep the PCBs encapsulated, it's safe, and then the monitoring will be done over time to ensure that it remains safe versus removal.
Okay, can you describe a little bit of, this seems kind of late in the process for going through that type of testing. Can you explain a little bit why this type of testing is happening now, as opposed to maybe a year or two earlier, when...
Yeah, I believe, and I believe I have my dates, the PCBs were found in, I want to say late 2015, this round of PCBs, and it was part of the 1961 edition, which it was discovered as a result of testing based on the windows and the windows that were replaced. The EPA was aware, they were notified, and as part of our plan to address it, that was approved by them, was to continue testing for it. But these were not discovered at onset of the project.
Okay, so this testing is part of the plan we gave to EPA to continue tracking that down. So is this defined or confined to some area of the building, or is this throughout the entire school?
No, it's confined to, it's been identified specifically in sections of the building that I think, Sal can probably give more detail to, but it's contained to the 61 and 62, I believe.
Yeah, it's primarily Sal Morbido, Manager, Construction, Security, and Safety. It's the paint that was discovered that was of concern was in the 61, 62 additions on the building. The concern of the EPA upon the approval of the abatement plan for the windows was there wasn't a data set that was full enough to say, yeah, that's where it is. So they wanted a testing plan rather quickly. It's I believe it was within 30 days of the acceptance of the abatement plan, which was done. There's many steps that the environmental consultant has taken care of in the past 18 months, or 2 years since this approval. Not only did they give them a testing plan, they have done 2 rounds of testing of air wipes. They've also done investigation paint scrapings to say, this room has it, this room doesn't. When they initially were getting the anomalous results, there were a couple of odd readings in the data set. They didn't know which, they knew it was a paint, they didn't know which layer of paint. Was it the green paint, was it the blue paint, was it the white paint? So they tracked that down, and the suspect is that it's a pale green paint in the 1961-62 editions, primarily across the back wall of the school on those classrooms. And, originally, those were lab rooms, so it might have been part of the more cleanable surface or something like that.
So that must be the first layer of paint, right?
First layer of paint. What this testing is to prove is what I got the wording here: the town shall conduct an investigation and evaluate potential remedial alternatives. And as Mark said, the ultimate goal is to say, we just want to leave it the way it is. It's encapsulated. It is not a hazard. All the wipe samples come up negative. The air samples are all well within EPA limits, well within the EPA limits. What this third round of testing is now that we're doing a year worth of testing, we've gotten more data in on the ventilation scenarios in the building. And in conjunction with dialogue with the EPA, the environmental consultant came up with that there should be a third round of testing for that early summer ventilation period where a lot of windows are open. We have a high ventilation rate from natural ventilation as opposed to mechanical ventilation. And that's just to add to the testing that's already been done that's shown no hazard. But they want to get all of them so that they don't submit the report to the EPA And they say, you know what, did you think about this? And we're doing that test 6 months, a year from now, and not solving the problem. So they're trying to be proactive by getting that testing and data into the report for the EPA.
So quickly, same test,
Same test.
different season, more fresh air versus ventilated.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all around the ventilation rates and that. Yeah, really not going to see any issue with the wipe samples. There hasn't been one that's come up with anything,
Nor is it likely to change.
and that's not going to
Okay.
change. There's too many layers of paint.
Any further comments from the board? Other than that, all right, Mark, thank you very much for the update. Sal, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up, non-recurring capital for the town to hear and consider certain town non-recurring projects. I believe we heard most of the town projects in our last meeting, but there was one that did not get heard at that time, which was the Fairfield IT Department. So,
Yep.
Hi, I'm Dave Kelly, Town IT Director. One of the more important items on my very long to-do list that I've developed over my first year here is to develop a disaster recovery business continuity plan for town IT. I tend to want to try to avoid the disaster or mitigate it as much as possible rather than deal with it once it happens. Currently, the town's two main production data centers, these are rooms that have town servers and storage for on-premise applications, are located in basements of buildings in town, in the floodplain, fairly close to the sound, not generally considered a good practice. A data center in a basement of a building has never been considered a good practice. But that said, that seems, I think there was substantial risk because our data centers are so positioned. Excuse me, I'm coming off of a cold, so I'm still a little hoarse. When I arrived, there was a project underway to move one of the town's 3 data centers, the one located in the Fairfield Woods Branch Library, to a co-location facility in Trumbull. And that project is just about complete. But I think that we now need to do the exact same thing for the actual day-to-day running data centers in town. Before I came to town, I peeked in on the recordings of the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen meetings and heard the discussions, and there were talks about building a building for $1 million, which is just very expensive. So I've been looking for an alternative that would be a happy medium of benefit and cost. When I've been going around town meeting with other department heads and whatnot, I have not been bashful about asking, do you have a space in your building that might accommodate a small data center where we could move the town's server rooms? And I've gotten very positive responses, very cooperative responses, particularly from the police department. I met with Lieutenant Buccarati at the police department. He gave me a tour of the building, a tour of their existing data center, which is in the basement. The police department has a data center, the town has a data center. But then he showed me another space that on the second floor of the building that he thought might be an appropriate place to move, to utilize as a data center, to refit as a data center. And I looked at the space, and as it's configured, it is not suitable as a data center. But if we moved a few walls, reshaped things a bit, and built it up as a data center, it could be. So he dragged me down the hall and around the corner to Chief McNamara's office, and Chief McNamara immediately said, that sounds great. Anything we can do to help. So my suggestion is that we try to build out a small data center in the second floor of the police department, utilizing and moving a few walls around, utilizing existing storage space and what is currently a makeshift data center of sorts into a truly sustainable, supportable data center. We are still within the floodplain. It is not the perfect location, but I think it's substantially better than where we are now. And I think the cost, especially if we were to compare it to building a building or doing more of this co-location stuff where we rent space with a vendor somewhere, I think in the long term, the total cost of ownership would be substantially lower if we were to just utilize the space within town to do this. The police department has a lot of good things about it. It has good backup power. It's in a secure building. Even though it's in a floodplain, the building is slightly elevated. You can't get better security than a police department from a physical security point of view. And we are also solving their problem with their data center by moving their data center up to the second floor as well. I'm looking to downsize basically from 2 data centers into 1 and raise them up. We currently have a beautifully built, professionally designed data center back when it was built in the 1970s. It's just about the size of this room, but currently with the modern technology, the miniaturization of IT equipment, and the fact that we are gradually moving things into the cloud, and with software as a service hosted vendors, our need for space is very small. In fact, most of our equipment in town can fit in 2 small data racks. You can think of a data rack as the refrigerator in your kitchen. That's all it is. So we don't need an 800 square foot data center to house a rack or 2 worth of equipment. Back when the data center was built in the 70s, and a disk drive that held 100 megabytes of data was the size of a Maytag washing machine, then yes, you needed a lot of square feet. No longer the case. The current primary data center for the town has a running air conditioning unit that is near end of life, and it has a battery backup UPS system, which the vendor has informed me is at the end of life. That's not an emergency. They'll still maintain it for a couple more years, but they are no longer doing preventive maintenance on the unit. So we're facing some costs going forward right now, and I think it would be better to invest that money in a new location in a smaller downsized space than to maintain the space that we currently have.
Any questions from the board?
Just a couple. With a new UPS backup, right?
I'm sorry?
With a new backup, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How many servers do you need to put in the room?
We currently have, the total town server fleet is down to about a dozen physical servers,
Okay.
each of which hosts about 5 to 10 individual virtualized servers. But from a mechanical device point of view, we're talking about 10 devices that tall slid into a rack.
Okay.
Plus, we have storage devices that take up some space.
Okay. And how long will it be before you're able to reduce your number of physical boxes even more? How many virtual servers can you accommodate with the work you have to do?
How many virtual servers can you accommodate with?
How many virtual servers can you move to? You said you've
I'm
moved
looking
to
to
some.
move all of our physical servers into one room.
No, not one room. How many virtual servers can you set up to replace some of the boxes that we have today?
Well, the boxes that we have are the virtual servers. In other words, we have, for example, in the primary data center, we have 4 physical servers that are virtualized, which means that there are several different applications and systems
Right.
running on each of those.
That I understand. I was wondering how much additional consolidation you can do. Maybe that's a better way
Well,
to
I
ask the
think that
question.
we're probably as small as we can get. The servers are down to 1.5 inch tall. I mean, and frankly, if we had to expand for some reason, adding another 1.5 inch device to a rack would not be a deal breaker. But our trend is in the other direction. Gradually over time, there are many town applications that are going to remain on town servers for the foreseeable future. Many of the applications are not cloudable or not offered by the vendor as a software as a service or as a cloud-hosted thing. But the trend, whenever we're examining a new product, it's often either entirely hosted with a vendor or in the cloud, or it may be a hybrid where some of the stuff is hosted here and some of it's hosted with the vendor. But I think the trend is toward shrinkage rather than growth.
Thank you.
I'm all set, thank you very much.
One, thank you. We went through some serious trauma in Irene, and some serious trauma again during Sandy. I remember seeing our public works guys out working the sump pump in the
I've heard the
middle of
stories,
Monday
I wasn't
night,
here, but yes.
as the water was approaching Town Hall,
Yep.
to keep it out of the basement. So I think this solves a tremendous problem from that standpoint.
Yep. Actually, we've had a few water events not related to storms in the basement, so it's not the only time that water goes into a basement.
Right.
Plumbing breaks.
And I'm sure the building
Leaks.
department would like to talk to you about using that space once you free it up, because they've got more than a few files to track, but we can talk to Tom Conley about that another time. All right, any comments from the public? Dick, if you would come up, and we have your letter in our packet, but if you please present it as you'd like.
I just made some extra copies here, so.
Thank you.
And I made these copies because I realized I sent this out pretty late earlier today, which is pretty late for this meeting. So my name is Dick Mahusky, and I'm the chairman of the Flood and Erosion Control Board. And I just want to support the location in the police department. I read through the 14 points, and it seems like a well-considered location. What I included in the packet, if you go to the GIS site on the town website, you'll see that the police station is on the very edge of the existing floodplain, but it is not in it, whereas the fire department, for instance, that building is totally within the 100-year floodplain. The future map redraw, based on what sea level rise does, who knows where the floodplain extents are going to go to. But as you mentioned, if you look at the police station, it actually has dirt bermed up onto the first floor level, and the little line around the police station is at an elevation of 14. The zone at the edge of that is AE 11, which is an elevation of 11 feet. Interestingly, one of the questions that's ongoing with sea level rise and flooding is what's going to happen in 100 years? How high is the water going to be in 100 years? And there recently was an article that's being published by Circa in the state. Jim Donnelly, he's an oceanographer, scientist, and Flood and Erosion has had him involved in various things we've been involved in over the years. A very, very bright fellow. And he has looked at these graphs which show by 2100 the sea level will be 6 feet higher than it is today, 8 feet higher than it is today. It's kind of throw your dart and see where it lands. But his considered opinion is that for 2050, the high end of what sea level rise is going to be in Connecticut is 18 inches above what it is today. 2050 is 30 years out. We'll be doing something different with computers 30 years from now. But the point of that is, if you put it there, given that the first floor is at 14 feet, and you get some of that electrical gear up above 14 feet, 30 years from now, the 14-foot elevation will still be 1 foot above AE 11 plus 2, which only gets you to 13. So we just think it's a good location.
Dick, thank you. I know it's not quite as directly relevant to what we're talking about here, but if we could follow up after this to make sure that we get our police department and public works talking about what we can do about that.
Okay.
All right? And thank you very much for taking time to write that up.
Thanks, Dick.
Thank you.
Any further comments from the public?
Thanks.
Seeing none, back to the board. All right, thank you.
All right.
All right. Next up, we have non-recurring capital request from the Board of Education. And again, just so we're clear, we've got the bond resolutions that follow this, and we break those bond resolutions out at 3 levels based on the length of life of the project that we're bonding. But we'll go ahead and listen to the Board of Ed, so we hear all the projects, and then we can discuss them after that, okay?
You got it.
Mr. Cullen? All
Like to have hard copies?
Yeah, yes, sure. It's easier.
right, thank you.
For the record, Tom Cullen, Executive Director of Operations. Our request this fiscal year is for a total of $1,793,245. for non-recurring projects, specifically 4 projects for the school system. First project is the system-wide security infrastructure upgrades. I wanted to make sure it was clear that we weren't asking for another phase of work. We have 3 phases in place that are about 90% complete. This funding request is to supplement and complete the ballistic glazing work at all the schools from the last 2 phases. As we worked with the police department, determining the proper product we wanted to use, we found as we were doing the schools and bidding them out that we needed the extra $345,250 to complete all the schools. So that request isn't a new phase, it's just to complete the 3 phases we have. We provided all of the information from the 14 points questions that the town uses, and the breakdown, and some photographs from the glass armor security panel company. The second project is the information technology and electrical upgrades. Last fiscal year, we asked for the same project for the elementary schools, $200,000. We completed that work this past summer. Went out to bid, hired an engineer to help us monitor the project. To get it done, it went very well. We're very pleased. And this request is to do the secondary schools, so the 3 middle schools and the 2 high schools. And that will bring them up to date. Provided the breakdown, answering the 14 questions. The contractor breakdown is from the bids we received for the elementary schools. Consultant, I'm thinking, should be very little, $10,000, because I'm hopeful we can use the same engineer who already did the 11 elementary schools and save us some money there. And then a small contingency. We did run into just a couple of issues last summer with some of the power units that were in the ceilings, and there was a minor change order. So I projected that. The third project on page 13 is Fairfield Ludlow High School, the student parking lot. We put this back in. This was the project from last fiscal year that got rejected. It certainly hasn't gotten any better. We want to request that we do this again. We had to spend $7,160 to restripe it and number it again because it's crumbling. So the numbering and the labeling of the spaces doesn't stay and last like it would on new pavement.
Tom,
So-
just on that, has the price changed since last year on that?
Yes.
The base project?
Yes, I added $25,000. I put an escalator in there of 4%. I also don't have confirmation that the Tilken Tomaso company and the Garrity Reclaiming Company still holds the state contract. We get better pricing from contractors that are providing a state contract number that they're doing work for the state of Connecticut for school systems. And it's a little bit better number, and they work with DPW and us. We're not sure that Tilken is going to carry through that state contract into 1819.
And just for clarity, since you've got close-up pictures of the condition of the parking lot, is there a picture of which parking lot at Ludlow this is?
It's the student parking lot, so it's the back parking lot where the new solar carports roof systems
So
are.
we're going to pave under the carports now?
Yes.
Okay. Is that... Okay.
Well, does that point alone present any additional challenges?
None at all.
Paving?
When we did the solar carports, we made sure, we worked with the company closely to be sure triaxle dump trucks would fit under their buses, certainly repaving, asked if there would be an increase in cost. They said it'd be a little bit more difficult, but no increase in cost for material or labor.
Okay.
So they shouldn't have an issue at all.
As far as navigating around things.
Right?
Wow, that's really good. I thought that the solar
too.
panels would cause more trouble. That's great to
I
hear.
did too.
That's great to hear.
But we worked closely with the company, and they were very helpful and willing to go higher. We tried to put as many as the stanchions and support members into islands and grass areas so there's cantilevered over
Okay.
to keep it out of the way of all the cars.
Okay. Didn't mean to interrupt your
No,
presentation.
not at all. Questions anytime.
Thanks.
The last project is a project that was new and added to the waterfall schedule this past September. You may remember it's a something that came through the Board of Finance, and Nancy Burns is here to talk to if we need her. It's a switch project that was projected in her long-term plan. We were asked if we could do it over multiple years, and we agreed that maybe 2 years we could complete a replacement of all the switches for the district. So I included that information in the answering of the 14 questions. Nancy helped me with all of that. I provided what the total project would be for the whole job for both years, so you could see that, and then what the request was just for this first phase.
And then what's the reliability or probability of the E-grant for $460,000?
It's looking real good, but I'll have Nancy talk to it.
Hi, Nancy Burns, IT Director for the Board of Education. Right now, it looks great. There's, the second year is the one that's in question because there's a 5-year commitment to what they call Priority 2 funding, which is basically internal connection funding in the E-rate grant. We are using some of that money because you get an allocation per school for the 5-year term to do our middle school project, the wireless project, that's in the operating budget of the Board of Ed. But we're assuming that we'll be able to grab as much funding as is available, and when they renew, we've already advocated to continue, along with many other school districts, that the Priority 2 funding is necessary for institutions of our size. If you went back around 4 years ago, our district would not have qualified based on our economic and demographics, and they realized that that was I don't want to say unfair, but it was causing districts issues in trying to get funding to get this kind of infrastructure work done.
So this is a state grant.
No, this is a federal
Federal
grant.
grant.
If you look at your phone bill, you'll see something at the end of it in small print that says Universal Service Fund. That's what funds this federal grant. And all districts that, and town libraries that choose to can apply for this grant funding for certain kinds of projects. As a matter of fact, our infrastructure costs, our internet costs, and then the access for our wide area network, so how our schools communicate with each other through technology, is funded through E-rate, and we get about 40% of our costs reimbursed. So what you see in the Board of Ed budget is actually 60% of the actual carry costs for those fees.
You mentioned libraries can apply for this. Do you know if our town libraries are aware of that? and
Yes,
if they've
they are,
applied?
and yes, they have, and I've consulted with them on many occasions.
Okay.
So I believe they're continuing that.
Good, thank you. That's the kind of teamwork we like to see. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
All right.
I forgot to add that we're also working with the state on security grants. They've issued them 3 years. 2 of the years we were lucky to get an award. 1 year we weren't, but we are investigating it again this year and doing our best to work with the state to try and get a grant for the
Yeah.
security work we're doing.
Yes, please. It'd be nice to get some of that state money back here. All right, any comments, questions from the board?
No, I'm good. Thank you for the presentation.
This seemed very clear and very complete. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. I guess before we get into voting, just any comments from the public? We're not voting on this item, but since it is part of a voting package. Yes, please.
Hi,
If you'd come up to the podium, identify yourself.
Hi, my name's Kathleen Joy Ross. I live at 682 Beach Road. I'm a new resident to Fairfield, also a new parent to the Sherman School. And I think it's really important on 2 counts. One, the Sherman construction and how that
Excuse me, ma'am.
infrastructure.
We're talking about the non-recurring projects right now?
Yes, excuse me. The infrastructure impacts everything from the district and all of those projects we just talked about. So the 2 go hand in hand. We have to move forward quickly, and my main concern is the educational technology and making sure we have the infrastructure in place for all of our schools across all districts. However, some schools are limited in terms of their infrastructure today, and so we really have to focus on getting everything done as fast as we can
All right.
for the security of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, back to the board. Any final comments here, or should we move on to the next item, which would be the bond resolutions?
Move on.
Next item. All right, so here we are, item number 7 is the non-recurring bond resolutions. This requires Board of Finance and RTM approval to consider and adopt the bond resolutions appropriating funds for the costs of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. May I have a motion to approve?
Make a motion.
A second?
Second.
All right, I'm going to point out to the board that there's in part of our backup or handout, there is motions for non-recurring capital. So you can see the 3 items there, and those are broken out. And if you look at the other handout prepared by the Board of Finance, they take us through these. And I think it is simplest if, Mr. Mayor, could I ask you just to step through the document and make the board aware of kind of how and why these bonding resolutions are structured the way they are.
Did you want to go through the exhibits or just that question on that?
Whatever you feel would make the most sense, will. And also,
All right, well, let's just very quickly go through the exhibits. You have Exhibit 1. You want to go through?
yep. Everybody have it? Yeah.
Yeah, so Exhibit 1 just basically shows the projects that have been presented, shows the life of the anticipated life of the asset. You see you have the 5-year, the 10-year, and then the 20-year, and then the total. And what's presented, the Board of Finance like this, rather than seeing it all put into one, they like to see it by asset life period. That's why you have 3 resolutions. If you go to the second page, or Exhibit 2, on the left-hand side, you have the funds that are presented again. 1, 2, all of, and on the right-hand side, you have the proposed capital workshop items that were presented in September. You can see there's one new one, the command vehicle, which was not in September. And you can see when you go to the right side, there are 5 that are not, 4 that are not presented today. I'm not sure the specific reason for each of them, but Hulls Farm Road, the bridge, the Brookside Drive Bridge, the Southport Sidewalk Connector, and the Grassmere pedestrian improvement. Department heads chose not to present them at this time. And then you flip the page, you got this.
Just to be clear, and I believe those had to do with the projects not being ready on time. They were not cut for any administrative or financial reasons.
Right, thank you, yes. And then on the next page, Exhibit 3, you have the same kind of information. The one new item from the Board of Ed was the IT switch replacement project, and 2 that were deleted, the McKinley and the middle school roof warranty projects, which I understand the Board of Ed entered into some new contracts which extended the warranties without the cost, which is a good thing. And then the next page shows, given the waterfall, given the capital plan projects, with the approval of this set, with the forecasted interest rates, you can see the most important column is the column on the right, which we have a policy not to exceed 10% debt service as a percent of budget. You can see projected for 17-18 is 8.34%. It does go up when we start adding the WPCA bonding later, and it goes back down, but we stay well within the 10%. So that's kind of where we are. We're on track. And so what is being requested is to authorize three bond authorizations, one for the 5-year, one for the 10-year, and one for the 20-year.
Any questions or comments from the board?
No, just one quick one. The IT switch replacement that's in this year for the 972, it's roughly a $2 million project. What year was that originally thought was going to be done? 18, 19? Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, to go to the public.
Yeah.
Any comments from the public?
Are we gonna vote on these individually?
Well, we've got, we can make any edits we want to the schedules. if we choose, but our motion says to consider adopt the bond resolutions. These are the bond resolutions, so
I just have one comment then. We're gonna vote.
go right ahead.
So I support everything in here. The only thing I want to point out is, like I did 2 weeks ago, the command vehicle for the fire department. I find it a little, it's just bizarre that we're bonding for one vehicle. I'm confused by the town policy to put the vehicles in the operating budget. And I think about the more expensive vehicles we don't bond for, like the dump trucks at Public Works and other high-priced vehicles we get on a yearly basis. For example, the police cars go in the operating budget. But this one sort of sticks out like a sore thumb, that the fire command vehicle, one vehicle, is getting bonded for this year. I will support it, but I think in the future I want some clarification on our vehicle bonding policy.
No, I think your point's well taken. I think that we could go either way on that. When you look at the items that we do put in, it's the dump trucks, even though those have been cut significantly in this year. When we do put the dump trucks in, it's because we're buying 4 a year, so it's a steady stream. When you look at the police cars, it's because we're buying 8 to 10 a year, it's a steady stream. When you look at things like fire trucks, where we buy those once every few years, we tend to bond those. So in this case, we're buying command car once, so as opposed to increasing, the budget and consequently taxes, spreading it over the life of the vehicle allows us to spread the tax increase over the life of the vehicle. But you're absolutely correct, it could go either way. Any further comments here?
No.
We went to the public. Any comments from the public? All right, back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. So that gets us through 5, 6, 7. We've got rid of 8 already. 9 and 10 are the 3 RTM resolutions. I think we discussed earlier that we approved those when the projects came before us, if that's still okay with the board?
Yep.
Yeah.
So they kind of track to the RTM at the same time? Agreed. All right. And then the next item up is the tax collector. To consider and act upon tax refunds as recommended by the tax collector in the amount of $82,586.90. May I have a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion.
A second?
Second.
I've confirmed the number matches.
Perfect.
Indeed.
Thank you. So are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Next up, town attorney, a private executive session concerning pending litigation. All right, thank you. I have a motion to come back into public session.
I'll make a motion.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're back in public session. While we're in private executive session, no votes were taken and no motions were made. And I think our discussion's over on that, so we can go right to adjourn.
Yes.
I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
We got through everything else. I thought we'd be in good shape. Thank you for rearranging things, Chris, because that... We wouldn't have had that good a discussion. We wouldn't have had the discussion at all. Wouldn't have been as good without you. All right, bye for now.